Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Rethinking the Drops with iDose TR. So far in this series, experts have reviewed patient selection and access for this procedural pharmaceutical, as well as shared insights in how to integrate this glaucoma treatment into their practice. In this third installment, Dr. Savak Teymoorian, Courtney Bovee, and David Stevens share insights into how to educate patients about iDose TR.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone back to another podcast for iDose TR. Specifically, we're going to talk about the patient conversation. My name is Dr. Savak Teymoorian. I'm an interventional glaucoma and cataract specialist in South Orange County, California. I'm joined by two phenomenal hosts here along with me, Dr. Courtney Bovee and Dr. David Stevens. Thank you both for coming on. I'll have you guys introduce yourself and we'll get right to it. Courtney, why don't I have you kick it off?
Great to be here. I am a glaucoma specialist practicing in Tampa Bay, Florida, and kind of excited to share my experience with the iDose TR and obviously have a great conversation with yourself and Dr. Stevens.
Looking forward to it. And David?
Yeah, it's great to be here. My name's David Stevens. I'm also in Florida, just south of Dr. Bovee down in Fort Myers. I do cataract, glaucoma, and refractive surgery, and it's great to be here.
Outstanding. Well, again, great to have both of you guys. I'm looking forward to the insight you're going to give to us. Well, let's talk specifically, with regards to iDose TR, we want to focus in on the patient conversation. So there's certainly the medical side to things, but there's the actual human being side to it, which I like to focus in on. So we're thinking about how do we address iDose TR to our patients? And I'd love to hear basically your thoughts on, number one, how you present it. And then we're going to talk about a couple of other things that go from there. So I'll have you kick it off, Courtney, for us. You have a patient that comes in the room. You think they may be a candidate for iDose TR. How do you go about talking to the patient?
I think this is, like you mentioned, probably the most important part of this procedure is just kind of understanding the patient and how iDose TR can add value in their glaucoma journey. To kind of step back, it's how do I understand where the patient's at with glaucoma? How do I meet them where they're at? And a lot of times better understand what concerns they have with glaucoma, what concerns they have with, say, maybe their current regimen. For example, I just had a patient this week that I'm doing iDose on this Friday, and I looked at him, and he said he was doing fine, but I looked at him, and he had all these excoriations all over his eyelids, which to me that was a bromonidine allergy. So for him to maybe better understand that the drops were not suiting him in his current glaucoma management. Little cues like that we see all day long, but unless we kind of better understand the patient, they don't understand how much value add something like iDose TR can add to their glaucoma care.
And I love what you're talking about, Courtney. We're really talking about how do we address people's problems, but more importantly, how do we create value for a patient?
I think there's kind of two main categories with iDose TR. One of them is patients who are already undergoing cataract surgery or a MIGS procedure who are on drops and maybe having issues with it. And those people, it's a pretty simple conversation. It's, hey, at the same time we're doing, iStent Infinite or, cataract surgery, you're also on X drop, latanoprost or whatever. And we have a replacement for that we can place into the eye that continuously releases the drug. We're already doing surgery. I think it'd be a great option for you. And those patients are usually like, wow, yeah, that sounds great. That totally makes sense. Patients who are, intolerant of drops, who are going to be going for a kind of a standalone iDose TR procedure. I like what Dr. Bovee said. She said, we're kind of meet them where they are and understand that the patients are probably not using their drops correctly, or if they are, they're probably getting side effects from them. Say, hey, your eyes look pretty irritated. Did they get dry in the morning? Yeah. Well, hey, do you know that could be from your drops? We have options besides drops if you'd be interested in them. And then kind of presenting it in a way that we're giving them a solution to the problem. And also just being enthusiastic, excited, believing that what we're recommending will be helpful to them. I think it just helps get us on the same level as the patients and kind of come across that we're really trying to help them with the problem that they're having.
David, I really like the part where you talked about showing some enthusiasm when you talk. One of the most common things that I come across with other doctors when they tell me, hey, I'm having a hard time bringing it up with patients or they don't necessarily want to do it, like, what is it that you talk about? I think showing that level of confidence in the selection of what you're offering is a really important thing. We say taking care of glaucoma is like 90% ophthalmology, 10% psychiatry of the patient, right? Are there any tips specifically with other doctors that are having a hard time, maybe connecting on a personal level, or strategies they may want to consider utilizing just to help to maybe ease the patient's anxiety and kind of get them across the finish line for what it is that you're recommending?
For me to talk with enthusiasm, that comes with the confidence of knowing the procedure is going to be really successful. So for me, just really understanding the data and knowing that not is this going to benefit them from a cosmetic and how they feel standpoint, it's also going to improve their clinical outcomes from a glaucoma perspective. Having that kind of double-edged sword and really understanding the data helped me to talk with more confidence, knowing that, they're gonna have multiple different benefits from this, from how they look. A lot of times it might be better financially from doing drops and also, better controlled glaucoma outcome.
Courtney, I have a question. Is there a specific piece of data, like you're going to be like, this is the one piece that I use a lot, or I think is the most effective for me, that you maybe want to share with the other doctors? I know there's a lot of data to share, and obviously we don't want to glance over everything, but what's one pearl that you may want to share with them?
I think for the iDose, where it really stands out is the longevity piece of we can do this procedure pharmaceutical. And if we look at the pharmacokinetic data, knowing that there will be drug delivery into that third year is impressive for me to get that durability from the procedure.
If we're talking purely about, data-driven outcomes, glaucoma success, something that I do feel like vibes with, especially glaucoma specialists, is a paper showing that the degree of prostaglandin orbitopathy is associated with worse outcomes for trabeculectomy and incisional surgery. And a lot of my more astute patients really get that too, because they're using their drops and they already notice that there's some visible changes to the external eye in that area. And I'm like, hey, if you're on this drop for years and years and years, your glaucoma might get worse. Like we're trying to prevent this from happening, and lower that to a degree. And I think that's part of the clinical outcomes. We say the doctors say, oh yeah, you know what, that's actually a surgery this patient might need down the road. And we can try to help give them a better prognosis for their glaucoma. Um, a lot of doctors, I think, that we talk to are trying to come around to the idea that drops are not kind of the foundational treatment for glaucoma, and kind of developing an interventional mindset, and that patients' lives are going to be actually better the less drops they're on. And so some of it is sort of like foundational, coming around to understanding that being on less drops is actually helpful for the patient's glaucoma and for their quality of life.
And I think you're doing a good job. You're highlighting that it's a journey and it's a process. As with everything that we do in medicine, every patient's going to be different and what their barriers are going to be different too. Now, we talked about some of these things that may be an issue for the doctor when it comes to the patient conversation. When you guys are talking about iDose TR to patients, are there any specific resources that you guys use just to help the patient understand what's going on?
Sure. I mean, it starts with the conversation in the lane, really. So it really starts without any resources. One thing I like to bring up to patients, if we're really getting into the kind of nitty gritty of data, is just looking at kind of what the diurnal curve does, what fluctuations of pressure. So citing, the AEGIS study where they looked at patients whose pressures fluctuate and having a significantly higher incidence of progression. Our surgery counselors who schedule the patients and really spend a lot of time with them going through details have some of the materials provided by Glaukos. There's a little video that like a video box that they have, and there's the hockey puck with a real size iDose TR. I think that's helpful for the patients to get some of that material. And then some people like to take those pamphlets home, kind of read the FDA information, and we'll call and ask questions. And so, in the room, I'll just pull up a picture of an iDose TR, kind of describe the anatomy to them and say, hey, there's an oil that fills this titanium canister in the iDose TR. It continuously percolates into the eye, sort of like an essential oil diffuser for a glaucoma medication. And I'll show them a picture of kind of where it sits in the eye. But for the most part, a lot of our Glaukos information, particularly, is with our surgery counselors.
I think, David, I need to confess, initially when I saw the hockey pucks, I'm like, this is really not going to be useful. But then I asked myself, do my patients truly understand like what these dimensions are? Because dimension of an iDose TR, 1.8 millimeters by zero point 0.8 millimeters by half millimeter. Is it something that the patient understands or not? And if you ask a majority of patients, they don't actually know what that means. And, I'm not saying this in a bad way, but really patients have two barriers in terms of my mind to adapting to an iDose TR. It's what exactly are you putting in my eye and what's it going to feel like? And we can give them verbally the dimensions of what it actually is, but I think showing them actually makes a big difference. And then when they realize it's actually magnified 10 times, I think it puts a lot of their concerns at ease. Courtney, do you have any strategies with resources? What do you share with your patients?
Just like Dr. Stevens, I think it starts with the conversation and then using any resources that we have. Um, Glaukos has a video box that I think is really, really helpful. I actually sometimes they keep it the surgery counselors, but for me, I like it in just the waiting room. And then that way patients can kind of even start the conversation of, I saw that, tell me more. And I'm excited to tell them more about the technology. And I really think it is kind of great to share for the patients that kind of want to know more, how much thought was put into this technology, that it was, over 15 years in the making, that it really is that kind of continuous glaucoma control that patients want. But that one video box really kind of starts the conversation nicely. I'm in the process of starting a new practice to offer this there. So currently, I'm kind of working with the surgery counselors so they better understand because I do think that's a really critical piece is, having, the techs understand better, the surgery counselors understand better. So I do think that's currently where I need to work a little more on this particular practice as I kind of integrate new technology in.
And I think, Courtney, you bring up a good piece. Showing a patient a video before they're even in the room with you is valuable because I think we'll all agree there's only so much time that we have with our patients, and we'd love to spend more time with them. But how do we create that value of time without us physically being there? And even not just the ability to have that time, but availability for the patient to view it whenever it is they're ready to view it. So I think using these strategies of the patient looking at a video, not when they're with you, whenever they want. In your case, it's in the office, but it's something that maybe that can be shared with them. That way, at their best time, whether that's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the patient can take their time to really look at it so they feel comfortable. It's that idea of creating that relationship with time with the patient without us physically having to be there. And with time constraints being more and more important for us, these are different resources we really do need to tap into. Something I want to dovetail off of, Courtney, what you said, you're talking about your surgical counselor, getting things arranged and kind of getting on the same page. Let's talk a little bit about like ancillary staff. Who do you guys use to incorporate the discussion for iDose TR? And what specifically do they offer to you and to the patient? How do they sort of put together the plan to deliver this to the patient?
This is something that I can admit to right now, I'm not where I want to be. Like I said, I started this new practice about 6 months ago. So they're kind of learning glaucoma, as a whole. But ultimately, where I want to be is this is a fluid conversation from the time that they're checking in to the time they're checking out. So every staff member kind of has some level of awareness. But ultimately, I'd love it as the technician working them up can kind of have those kind of probing questions, maybe flag a chart, and then ultimately, continue that on to the surgery counselor. So I have a long way to go, but I kind of have an idea. Probably my practice would look like yours. That ultimately would be kind of the goal. But that just kind of takes, building and having everybody buy in to kind of what we're doing and to see the value add.
And I think you're bringing up a really critical point. Again, that thought process of, so much of this is the psychiatry, our relationship that we build with our patients. The trust is very hard to create and it's so easy to lose. And if not everybody on the team is on the same page with regards to talking about the procedure itself or what the expectations are or how to troubleshoot things, the patients notice these things. And we want to keep them as calm as comfortable and excited about it is comfortable too. So just like anything else we do in life, like we just have to go through iterations of practice. But as you brought up, Courtney, we're always learning, always trying to get better. I think trying to keep an open mind on how do we get better at each and every turn, even if you're asking patients, well, how was the procedure for you? Or asking your staff, how was that interaction with the patient? These are critical things to incorporate because we're trying to deliver this message of iDose TR better every time we do it. We certainly won't be perfect at it the first time, but the more times we do it, the easier it becomes. And I think the discussion becomes easier. And most importantly, the confidence becomes easier too.
Yeah, I mean, our staff is really critical here. I mean, our technicians, when the patients come in, are, used to now asking how patients are doing with our drops in a non-judgmental way. What issues they're having, how is their dry eye, how are they doing with using their medications and remembering. And that's huge because it gets the patients thinking about it in between the technician working them up and me seeing them. And they always come out and kind of complain that, oh, they're always giving me different answers. It's not that you're not doing a good job. It's just that you've given the patient something to think about. And now they kind of get to clarify that answer a little bit in their mind before I come in. And that's really huge for me because I sort of have an idea of if they're having a problem or not before I go in. Our practice has 7 optometrists that practice kind of primary care. They're our backbone. They're almost kind of their own private practices. And so making sure, that we're all on board with sort of our algorithm, if you will, for glaucoma treatment, starting with SLT, trying to, avoid multiple topical medications if possible, you know, being interventionally mindful in our glaucoma treatment is big because they identify a lot of patients who come in for their regular pressure checks and then will, send them to me for any sort of thing after they've identified the issue. And then when they go back to them for post-ops, when we're starting a new procedure or any new technology, they need to be educated about what to do and what to expect so that they look confident and smart to the patients instead of saying, oh, I don't, what is that thing that Dr. Stevens just did? He didn't tell me about that. So keeping, everyone in the whole practice on the same page and up to speed whenever we're doing a new technology is super important. And then it gives the patients confidence because we know what we're doing. And all of our doctors and staff and technicians, are familiar with the technology. And then our staff gets enthusiastic when they see patients come in and they say, oh, wow, my eye feels a lot better. Or, wow, that's been really nice not to be using medications. Or, wow, I didn't have to think about bringing that on a trip because Floridians love to vacation and take cruises, and you can imagine taking your latanoprost or your whatever drop on the cruises is probably not going to get used very often. So I think they get to see the results and then get more excited about things, especially after that initial growth.
I think, David, you bring up a key point with your technicians asking the patients the question of what difficulty you're having. And sometimes they have a hard time because they get variable answers. You bring up a good point of the patient's never really been given the opportunity to complain about their medications. Before we had these procedural pharmaceuticals and interventional glaucoma, we didn't have great options. So hey, here are your drops, Mrs. Smith. You just got to use them. And, if you have a complaint, you have a complaint. Now we actually want to hear about what the complaint is. So I think it confuses the patient. They need a moment to think about, wait a minute, I can actually express that my dissatisfaction with the drops. And then our technicians sort of have to take that information and present it in a different way. And that's why when I bring it up with patients, you probably come across 4 reasons why patients have difficulty with their drops. It's going to be costs, side effects, remembering them and putting them in. But we really get with a reward with iDose TR is, what you were describing at the end of the procedure, when the patient finally comes back in and they realize they're off of their drops. And the fact that you answered one of their problems or a couple of their problems related to your drops, you see the smile on their face. And it's interesting. We finally get a little bit of positive feedback. In glaucoma, unlike cataract surgery and some other things we do in ophthalmology, we don't necessarily get that positive feedback. Because think back to the last 100 glaucoma prescriptions you've introduced for a patient. How many times has that patient come back and given you a high five for starting them on a glaucoma drop? Chances are that's not what the expression is that they're going to give to you. But when it comes to procedural pharmaceuticals like iDose TR, we're finally here. We can actually answer a patient's problem, and it gives us this positive feedback. And we start asking ourselves as a physician, well, gosh, if this patient was happy and I solved this problem, do I have another patient with the same problem? Or do I have another patient that has an issue that's similar to this that we can also solve? Now, these are things that we talked about in terms of answering problems for our patients that are of benefit. But I want to turn back to what are some issues with barriers to iDose TR? What are some issues that patients bring up with it? That way, we can prepare our doctors that are listening to this podcast when they're having the discussion, because not all discussions are going to be great. We're going to get some pushback or questions from our patients. What are some common things that you guys come across, and how do you guys go about answering them?
I think it's a great thing to kind of in your mind have kind of preloaded things that the patient might have as barriers as you discussed. I do think the patients, might say, I'm doing okay with my drop. And, I've been taking this for years. They say I quote unquote have never missed. And I think it's a nice opportunity in that, situation to point out that when we place the medicine in the eye, their pressure is better controlled. They have that better 24-hour control because the medicine's where it needs to be. And the patient might tell, I get the drop then. Well, we always know that drops have a peak and trough effect. This is a great kind of point for me of just looking at that option. A lot of patients might say, I want to get off all the drops. And I think that's another nice point of the technology with iDose TR being a procedure pharmaceutical. If we're looking for that medication-free endpoint, 81% of patients were medication-free at 12 months. So a pretty good percentage are going to get complete medication-free. That being said, if we're, looking at that patient and they're maybe a little more challenging, the way this is structured as the procedure pharmaceutical, I could combine this with another mixed procedure and we get that above and beyond pressure lowering too. So it has a lot of dynamics and kind of meet those different demands of the patient that might be harder for the patient to kind of understand the benefit of going to do a procedure.
And I think that's an important thing for the doctors in this discussion to be aware of that you brought up, where a patient says, I'm fine, I use my drops. That study where it shows that it's actually more effective than the drops, I think it's an important thing, both for like the psychiatry of the patient, but also for the doctor that's trying to figure out what benefit is this for maybe a patient that actually is saying that they're consistent with their medication. Well, we know that every millimeter of mercury matters, right? So if we can be more consistent, but actually be more effective, that's something we definitely want to think about. David, what are some common objections you come across and how do you approach them?
Courtney really did a great job addressing the patients who feel like they're fine on their drops. I think baseline here for surgeons who feel like they're having a hard time talking about it with patients is thinking to ourselves, is this something that we really believe is the best option for this patient? And how do I communicate with that with them? Because ultimately the patient is there in the chair for our recommendations, for us to tell them what we would do if it was our own eye or if they were our family member. And if that's how we communicate with them, patients will just at baseline be more receptive to our recommendations instead of saying, oh, well, we've got 4 different options. Let's talk about every option in detail and really confuse you. And then you don't really know what I would do if it was my eye at the end of the conversation. So giving an actual recommendation is super helpful. There's sort of the having a procedure barrier. Is getting off a medication worth having a procedure? And so, it all depends on sort of how we present it to patients on the procedure. And so the number one thing people usually are worried about is when am I going to be back to my normal activities? So that's one of the things I start with first is, this procedure is done in our surgery center under an operating microscope so I can see exactly where the iDose TR is placed and make sure it's stable in your eye. You'll get a little bit of sedation just to make sure you're comfortable. I could do it without it if we needed to, but it's nice to have it on board just to relax you so that everything goes smoothly. The next day, you'll basically be back to your normal activities minus a few restrictions that we'll give you, but your vision should be basically what it was the day before. It might be slightly blurry and a little scratchy. You might be a little sensitive to light. And we put you on drops to help mitigate any inflammation and prevent rare things like an infection that I personally have not seen before with this, but we do that just to be safe. And so I think just putting the patient at ease, we seem confident with the procedure that they're going to have. They know why we're doing it in the surgery center, and they know they're, kind of all those baseline questions have been answered in a couple of sentences. And I think that really helps mitigate the concerns about going to have a procedure done.
I think it's interesting. We focus in on this discussion to be the patient conversation, right? And we sort of think of it through the lens of the patient. But I think in this podcast, we've highlighted things that are critical for the doctor that's recommending for them to believe or know or understand about iDose TR or the procedure itself to feel confident about it. And I think it truly highlights the importance of the doctor, number one, believing in the product and believing in what they're doing, and also being able to express that with patients. So I think we talked about, a couple of key things, having the doctor be comfortable with iDose TR, the procedure itself, in terms of what exactly it is that we're doing, what are the results, and sort of how to present it with patients. Do you guys have any other high yield pearls that you may want to share just to any other doctor that we may have not covered when you're presenting iDose TR, or even just anything new to the patient itself that you think has helped, like a pearl that maybe we haven't touched upon?
Something for me is use the resources that Glaukos has. Like I mentioned, I was doing iDose TR at my previous practice. We had it really well set up. I've moved, and so now it's just kind of getting everybody on board with interventional glaucoma. It's new to them. So I've been working with the Glaukos reimbursement liaison. And it's, for these surgery counselors, it's a lot to understand the T code and the J code and who bills what and where it goes and how the OS works out. So I would say use the resources that are available to you, and they can really help the patient, journey along the practice and then journey along with their glaucoma, just alongside as I kind of help my, practice get better set up too. But that's been a huge resources for me. How about you, David?
Yeah, I'd say just reach out to a trusted colleague that you know is doing this already. I know there are a lot of groups and WhatsApp chats and things like that, but even just a personal call to someone you trust and know is like-minded, say, hey, how are things going? How are you doing with this? Can be really helpful. And then get excited about, being able to take really good care of glaucoma. I mean, it's a really tough disease. There's no cure. It's a chronic problem, but I think we can only make patients better with glaucoma by getting them off medications and by doing their cataract surgery, right? That's the only ways we can make them better, but everything else is just trying to prevent the unfortunate decline in vision that happens. We're just trying to flatten that slope. And so I think just getting excited about helping people's lives and having them think about one less thing in their busy day and empathizing with all our patients go through, I think can really help kind of clarify recommendations in our mind and help us take care of patients.
That idea of empathy for our patients, one thing I share with them, especially if I've given them a couple of different options, I think it's okay for us as doctors to be human with our patients too. And I think a majority of them, they really do trust us with their vision. We're like their eye guardians. I simply say, hey, there's a few options to pick from. I always recommend things like you're my family member. I think you would do the best with this option. Certainly, we can do any of these, but I would go along this specific idea. And I think when you present it to the patient, they realize that nothing is perfect, but they really want to know genuinely what it is that you would do too. So I think adding that human perspective things really helps out with the patient ease and confidence. And as you guys mentioned, just tapping into other doctors that do the procedure, where we could talk about specifically like actually how you do the procedure, but most importantly, how you talk about it with patients, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And again, we're all just trying to get a little bit better every day. Well, great. We'll go ahead and wrap up this podcast. Again, thank you so much, Courtney, David. Really appreciate you guys taking time out to have this discussion. I'm sure our listeners will find it beneficial. I appreciate you guys. And if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to all of us. And you guys all have a great night. Thank you all.
We hope you enjoyed this series on Rethinking the Drops with iDose TR. Thank you for listening, and thank you to our panel of experts. Sharing these practical insights and real-world conversations can help advance glaucoma care for our patients. Indications and usage. iDose TR, travoprost intracameral implant, is indicated for the reduction of intraocular pressure, IOP, in patients with open-angle glaucoma, OAG, or ocular hypertension, OHT. Important safety information. For ophthalmic intracameral administration, the intracameral administration should be carried out under standard aseptic conditions. Contraindications. iDose TR is contraindicated in patients with active or suspected ocular or periocular infections, patients with corneal endothelial cell dystrophy, example Fuchs dystrophy, corneal guttate, patients with a prior corneal transplantation, or endothelial cell transplants, example Decimase stripping automated endothelial keratoplasty, DSEK, patients with hypersensitivity to travoprost or to any other components of the product. Warnings and precautions. iDose TR should be used with caution in patients with narrow angles or other angle abnormalities. Monitor patients routinely to confirm the location of the iDose TR at the site of administration. Increased pigmentation of the iris can occur. Iris pigmentation is likely to be permanent. Adverse reactions. In controlled studies, the most common ocular adverse reactions reported in 2% to 6% of patients were increases in intraocular pressure, iritis, dry eye, visual field defects, eye pain, ocular hyperemia, and reduced visual acuity. Please see full prescribing information. You are encouraged to report all side effects to the FDA. Visit www.fda.gov/medwatch or call 1-800-FDA-1088. You may also call Glaukos at 1-888-404-1644.